We've spent decades really obsessing over the trip, the visuals and the whole mystical experience of psilocybin. But the research in our stack today suggests that subjective experience it might actually be secondary to the structural engineering happening inside the brain.
Right, yeah. We are not just talking about altered states anymore. We are
Yeah,
talking
yeah.
about physically rewiring your brain's architecture. It really is a massive shift from a mystical understanding to a strictly mechanical one.
And to figure out how this works, we are diving into some heavy hitters for this deep dive. We've got a deep molecular analysis, phase 3 clinical trial data, a recent study on personality structure, and a pharmacokinetic review.
The mission here is to understand not just the hallucinations, but the actual structural changes, and really to figure out why scientists are trying to separate that hallucination from the healing.
Exactly. So let's start with the receptor targets, because common wisdom has always been that psilocybin works by hitting the serotonin 5-HT2A receptor. That is basically the hallucination button.
You push it, reality distorts.
Right. But reading through that molecular analysis, it seems like 5-HT2A might actually be a bit of a red herring when we're talking about the real therapeutic effect.
It is the button for the psychedelic experience, for sure. But the data suggests the therapeutic magic, the actual antidepressant effect, is driven by the TRKB receptor. That stands for a tropomyosin receptor kinase B.
And the affinity data on this is just wild. Psilocybin and LSD bind to TRKB with 1,000-fold higher affinity than standard antidepressants do.
1,000-fold.
Yeah, that binding isn't just a chemical handshake, it is a construction order. It triggers neuroplasticity, so dendritogenesis and spinogenesis.
Precisely. You're literally growing new neural connections. You're sprouting new branches on nerve cells. It is a structural repair kit for the brain.
Which has massive implications. I mean, if the healing comes from TRKB and the trip comes from 5-HT2A, you could theoretically design a drug that hits one but not the other.
That is exactly why researchers are looking so hard at non-hallucinogenic analogs, things like 2BR LSD.
You get the rewiring without the kaleidoscope.
Right, which would let you treat depression without needing that incredibly complex clinical setup for a full psychedelic trip.
And that physical rewiring is actually showing up in the patient's personality software. Looking at the personality study on treatment-resistant depression, the shifts are entirely distinct from what we see with standard meds.
Yeah, psychology generally tells us that personality is calcified by adulthood. You are who you are. But in this study, patients didn't just feel less sad. Their scores for openness and extroversion went up significantly.
While neuroticism went down. That is the real differentiator here. Standard SSRIs are great at dampening neuroticism, basically turning down the volume on negative emotion.
But they rarely boost openness. In fact, people often complain of emotional blunting with SSRIs. They can be emotionally narrowing.
Whereas psilocybin appears to be emotionally expanding. Increasing openness means enhancing creativity, aesthetic appreciation, and just the ability to engage with new ideas.
It suggests a mechanism where you, the patient, are fundamentally more open to experience rather than just numb to the pain.
Which sounds like the perfect therapeutic outcome. But then we hit the wall of biological reality. We have the clinical report on compass pathways, and there's synthetic psilocybin, COMP360.
Right. They had a highly successful phase 3 trial. A 25 milligram dose showed a statistically significant rapid reduction in depression scores.
But the pharmacokinetic review throws a massive wrench in the gears of mass-producing this.
It all comes down to metabolism. Psilocybin is a prodrug, meaning it is biologically inactive until your body converts it into psilocin.
And that conversion relies on liver enzymes, specifically CYP2D6 and CYP3A4.
And the problem is that enzyme levels vary wildly between people. It turns that standard 25 milligram dose into a total gamble.
For one person, it's the perfect therapeutic window. For another person with hyperactive enzymes, that same pill spikes their blood levels way too high.
Or conversely, if they metabolize it poorly, it is barely even a microdose.
That variability has to be a nightmare for standard dosing. You can't just take one pill on a bottle if that one pill results in 5 times the blood concentration for different users.
It complicates things massively. We are looking at a future where we understand this drug as a mechanical process involving TRKB binding for neural growth, but we are hamstrung by the body's own inconsistent delivery system.
So the mechanics are clearer, but the delivery is still incredibly messy.
That really is the synthesis here. We have moved from magic to mechanics, but the mechanics are undeniably complex.
It definitely leaves you with a provocative thought. If we can successfully separate the neuroplastic healing of that TRKB binding, from the hallucinogenic experience of the 5-HT2A receptor.
Are we looking at a future where psychedelic therapy exists completely without the psychedelic experience?
Exactly. And without that subjective journey, is it even the same therapy? Something for you to mull over. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.